I'm Harrison Ridenauer.
And I'm Tony Kirby, and today we will present
The discovery and purification of penicillin. Before the discovery of penicillin, relatively superficial cuts and injuries could quickly evolve into life-threatening bacterial infections. This is due to the lack of any kind of antibacterial medication whatsoever. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered the first antibacterial treatment option by accident. After returning to his lab from a week-long vacation, he noticed a mold growing in a bacteria petri dish that seemed to be killing all the bacteria around it. Fleming took an interest in this peculiar mold and observed its bacteria-killing power further, noting that the mold not only killed bacteria, but prevented it from growing as well. Now thoroughly intrigued, Fleming attempted to isolate the bacteria-killing agent in the mold. Sadly, he could not develop a method to do so. Eventually, Fleming sent over his samples of the mold to various scientists and universities, including Oxford, where Howard Florey would get his hands on it. Before we jump into the actual purification of penicillin, we need to cover some of the most important people that helped develop this purification method. Howard Florey was born on September 24th in 1898 and grew up in Australia, where he excelled in school and graduated from the University of Adelaide with soaring colors. He then transferred to Oxford to study pathology on scholarship money and eventually traveled to America to work in pharmacology labs. After returning to Britain and researching vitamins, in 1935, Florey began building a team at Oxford to research diseases and develop new ways to cure them. The first person he hired for his team was Ernst Chain.
So Ernst Chain was in fact a bright young pathologist born in Germany, but eventually immigrated to England later on in 1933. He bounced around from facility to facility until eventually he was recruited by Howard Florey in 1935. In 1938, they both began adding on to Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin. They did this by studying antibacterial substances created by microorganisms. Now the juicy part, the actual purification of penicillin. Penicillium mold, which is the mold that was produced by penicillin, of course, was first grown in bedpans and soon after organic culture vessels. These vessels were used to collect a liquid contained in the mold that has penicillin in it. The process of purifying penicillin is essentially a freeze-drying method. All while maintaining the pH of the mold juice, they reduce the temperature and would evaporate the juice at the same time. After doing this many times, this process would eventually yield pure penicillin. Even though this is a way to extract pure penicillin, it is very inefficient as it would take gallons of this mold juice to produce about a fingernail of penicillin.
In the mid-1940s, the first experiments to test the effectiveness of penicillin as an antibacterial agent were conducted on mice. For the experiment, 8 mice were injected with lethal doses of the bacteria Streptococcus. 4 were left alone as the control group, and the 4 remaining were given doses of penicillin. After 17 hours, all 4 mice in the control group were dead, and all 4 mice that received a dose of penicillin were alive and well. The results were very promising. In 1941, enough penicillin had been purified to begin human testing on its toxicity. The first human test subject to receive treatment was a terminally ill woman suffering from cancer. Sometime after injecting her with a small amount of the antibacterial agent, she developed a high fever and began experiencing seizures until she eventually died. While initially disheartening, Florey and Chain realized that their batch of penicillin they used was not sufficiently purified, which accounted for the horrible response and encouraged them to more thoroughly purify their next sample.
After the initial test with the terminally ill woman, the next human test subject was a policeman who suffered from a severe staph and strep infection. After receiving many doses over the course of a couple of days, his condition improved greatly. However, even though he was doing well, Florey and Chain ran out of penicillin and the policeman relapsed and died from it. With their first experiment results being very promising, Florey and Chain were able to conduct more experiments on hundreds of people, eventually confirming the antibacterial properties of penicillin. Years later, in 1941, Florey, Chain, and the rest of their team traveled to the United States to refine and produce penicillin. With such promising results and high application for penicillin, Flory and Chain were able to get many sources of funding and resources in order to produce it.
The discovery and purification of penicillin may be the single most important advancement in human history, as it laid the groundwork for the antibacterial medication of today, which extends the human lifespan by decades, allowing us to work on scientific advancements for much longer, and largely preventing the tragedies of death caused by bacterial infections.
All right, we'd like to give thanks to Alexander Fleming for his scientific awareness, which allowed Howard Florey and Ernst Chain to purify and eventually develop penicillin. So we'd like to give them thanks as well. We'd also like to give thanks to Clemson University and more specifically Dr. Marcus for his time and allowing us to give our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this presentation. Here are our references.